Ever thought a secret affair could topple a king? What if a royal marriage sparked a war that reshaped a continent? From the 11th to the 15th century, love in the medieval world was never just about hearts and flowers. It was a high-stakes game where passion, desire, and sometimes pure desperation ripped through the political landscape like a wildfire. Get ready to dive into 9 incredible love stories that didn't just break hearts, but shattered kingdoms and changed the course of history. Number 9. Richard II of England and Anne of Bohemia. In the late 14th century, England was a kingdom still reeling from the Black Death and the ongoing 100 Years' War with France. Its young king Richard II was barely a teenager when he ascended the throne. At just 15 years old, a strategic marriage was arranged for him, not out of love, but out of desperate political necessity. His bride was Anne of Bohemia, the daughter of Charles IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the sister of Wenceslas IV, the King of Bohemia and future emperor. This alliance was meant to stabilize England's position in Europe, particularly as a counterweight to French influence and to secure funds for Richard's ongoing war efforts. When Anne arrived in England in December 1381, after a perilous journey across stormy seas and through hostile territory, the English people were not exactly thrilled. The marriage treaty required a massive payment from England to Bohemia, a sum that drained the royal coffers at a time when the common people were already struggling and burdened with heavy taxes. Chroniclers of the time noted the public's grumbling, seeing Anne as an expensive foreign import rather than a beloved queen-to-be. Some even called her the poor little Bohemian princess, a sarcastic nod to the financial burden she represented. Yet despite these inauspicious beginnings, something unexpected began to bloom between the young king and his equally young queen. Richard, known for his rather effeminate tastes, his love for fine clothing, and his somewhat aloof personality, initially seemed an unlikely partner for anyone. But Anne, though perhaps not conventionally beautiful, possessed a remarkable gentleness, intelligence, and a quick wit. She was known for her kindness and her willingness to listen. These qualities began to soften the often moody and insecure Richard. Their wedding took place in January 1382 at Westminster Abbey, and while it was a political arrangement, historical accounts suggest that a genuine affection, deep and quiet, began to grow between them. Unlike many royal couples of the era, Richard and Anne seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. They spent a great deal of time together, and Richard often referred to her as his dearest heart. Anne became more than just a consort. She became Richard's confidant and his most trusted advisor. She exerted a calming influence on him, often mediating in his increasingly tense relationship with his powerful noblemen. For instance, in 1386, when a group of powerful lords, known as the Lords Appellant, challenged Richard's authority and executed some of his favorites, Anne bravely interceded for one of them, Simon Burley, pleading with the appellants for his life. Though sadly, her pleas were ultimately unsuccessful. Her willingness to stand up for her husband and his friends, even in the face of such formidable opposition, showed her loyalty and courage. Anne also had a significant impact on English culture. She was known for introducing the side saddle to England, a more comfortable and dignified way for women to ride horses. More importantly, she was a patron of literature and art, and her influence is often credited with helping to popularize Bohemian and Central European artistic styles in England. She was also known for her quiet acts of charity and her compassion for the poor. Presence brought a certain grace and stability to Richard's often turbulent court. The couple remained childless, a matter of concern for a royal dynasty, but this apparent flaw in their union did not seem to diminish their bond. Their affection for each other was noted by several chroniclers, which was unusual, given the often transactional nature of royal marriages. Richard often spoke of her with great tenderness, and her influence seemed to bring out a more temperate side of his personality. For a while, with Anne by his side, Richard managed to navigate the treacherous waters of English politics holding his own against the ambitious uncles and powerful barons, who constantly sought to control him. Then tragedy struck. In June 1394, Anne of Bohemia contracted the plague and died at Sheen Palace, a place they both loved. She was only 28 years old. Richard was utterly devastated. His grief was profound. Chroniclers reported that he was so consumed by sorrow that he ordered Sheen Palace, the place where she died, to be completely demolished. He could not bear to be in the place that held such painful memories of her last moments. This drastic act was a clear sign of his deep emotional distress. Anne's death marked a turning point in Richard's reign. Without her steadying hand and gentle counsel, Richard's already volatile temperament seemed to worsen. He became more autocratic, more paranoid, and more ruthless in his dealings with his opponents. He began to rule with an iron fist, seeking vengeance against those he felt had wronged him in the past. His increasingly tyrannical behavior alienated even his loyal supporters. He launched a period of tyranny where he punished his former enemies, raised arbitrary taxes, and seized lands. Many historians link this dramatic shift in his personality and policies directly to the loss of Anne, suggesting that her calming influence had been essential in reining in his more extreme tendencies. Within 5 years of Anne's death, Richard II's reign spiraled into chaos. His arbitrary rule, his seizure of the lands of his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, the future Henry IV, and his general disregard for traditional legal practices led to a widespread rebellion. Henry Bolingbroke returned from exile, gathered support, and within a few short months deposed Richard. King, who had once been so passionately devoted to his queen, found himself imprisoned and eventually died in captivity, likely murdered. The tender love story between Richard and Anne, which started out as a mere political alliance, ended in personal tragedy and ultimately contributed to the downfall of a king, paving the way for a new dynasty and a long period of civil war in England. Her death was not just a personal tragedy for Richard, but a political catastrophe for his realm. Number 8. Henry IV of Castile and Juana of Portugal. In the mid-15th century, the Kingdom of Castile was a land of political intrigue, warring factions, and a monarchy struggling for stability. At the center of this storm was Henry IV, who became king in 1454. His reign was marked by constant challenges to his authority, often fueled by his own unusual personality, and, crucially, by the controversies surrounding his personal life. Henry had been married once before, to Blanche, II of Navarre, but that marriage was annulled after 13 years, with no children. The official reason given was that the marriage had never been consummated, leading to whispers and doubts about Henry's masculinity and his ability to produce an heir. These rumors would plague him throughout his life and become a significant political weapon against him. Desperate for an heir, and under immense pressure to secure the succession, Henry married again in 1455 to Juana of Portugal, the sister of King Afonso V of Portugal. This union was intended to cement an alliance between Castile and Portugal, bringing much-needed stability to the Iberian Peninsula. Juana was young, spirited, and beautiful, but she soon found herself entangled in the complex and often brutal world of Castilian court politics. For years, the second marriage, like the first, produced no children. The whispers about Henry's alleged impotence grew louder and louder. These rumors were not just gossip, they were highly dangerous for a monarch. A king who could not produce an heir was seen as a weak link in the chain of succession, inviting ambition from powerful nobles and rival claimants to the throne. The nobility of Castile, ever eager to increase their own power, seized upon this uncertainty. They began to question Henry's legitimacy as a ruler, linking his perceived personal failing to his capacity to govern. Then, in 1462, after 7 years of marriage, Queen Juana gave birth to a daughter, also named Juana. This should have been a moment of triumph, solidifying the king's line and silencing his critics. Instead, it ignited a firestorm that would consume Castile for decades. The birth of Princess Juana did not put an end to the rumors, it supercharged them. The nobility, skeptical of Henry's paternity due to his long history of childlessness, immediately circulated whispers that the true father was Beltran de la Cueva, one of Henry's most trusted and powerful favorites. Beltran was a Minic, an influential figure, and the king's apparent preference for him fueled the scandalous speculation. This new Princess Juana was swiftly given the derogatory nickname, La Beltraneja, by those who doubted her royal blood, a name that would stick to her for the rest of her life. The nobility fractured into two main camps, those who supported Henry and recognized Princess Juana as his legitimate heir, and those who declared her illegitimate and sought to replace Henry with a different claimant. The most prominent alternative candidate was Henry's younger half-brother, Alfonso, a young boy seen as a malleable figurehead by the rebellious nobles. In 1465, a group of powerful Castilian grandees, openly defying Henry, staged a mock deposition. They placed an effigy of Henry on a throne, stripped it of its royal insignia, and then proclaimed Alfonso as the new King of Castile. This incredibly bold and insulting act, known as the Farce of Avila, plunged Castile into civil war. The rebellion raged for years, with Henry's forces battling those loyal to Alfonso. The kingdom was torn apart by the dispute over the succession, with the legitimacy of Queen Juana's daughter at its very heart. Queen Juana herself became an increasingly controversial figure. Accusations of adultery were rampant, fueled by the anti-Henry faction. Her reputation was systematically attacked to undermine her daughter's claim. While the exact truth of the paternity of Princess Juana remains a historical debate, the political impact was undeniable. The rumors, whether true or not, served their purpose perfectly. They destabilized the monarchy and provided a powerful justification for rebellion. The Civil War eventually came to an uneasy truce. In 1468, Henry and the rebels signed the Treaty of Torres Stigesando. In this agreement, Henry was forced to disinherit La Beltraneja and recognize his half-sister Isabella, the future Isabella I, the Catholic, as his heir. This was a massive political concession, effectively accepting the rebels' narrative of his daughter's illegitimacy. Juana of Portugal continued to live in court, a queen whose reputation was in tatters. Her daughter denied her birthright by a document signed by her own husband. However, the drama was far from over. Juana of Portugal, unwilling to see her daughter disinherited, continued to fight for Princess Juana's rights, particularly after Henry's death in 1474. She publicly affirmed her daughter's legitimacy and sought support from her brother, Alfonso V of Portugal. This sparked a new, even more devastating conflict, the War of the Castilian Succession. This war pitted Princess Juana, supported by Portugal, against Isabella, who had by then married Ferdinand II of Aragon, laying the groundwork for a unified Spain. Conflict was brutal, lasting for 5 years and draining the resources of both Castile and Portugal. Ultimately, Isabella and Ferdinand emerged victorious. Princess Juana, La Beltraneja, was forced to enter a convent and renounce all claims to the throne. Her mother, Queen Juana of Portugal, lived out her days in exile, never truly recovering from the political and personal humiliation she endured. The love life, or rather, the perceived failures in the love life of Henry IV, combined with the accusations against his queen, had a profound and lasting impact. It fueled a brutal civil war, destabilized a kingdom, and ultimately determined who would inherit the throne of Castile, leading directly to the rise of Isabella and Ferdinand, and a unification of Spain, profoundly altering the trajectory of European history. All because of a deeply personal question of paternity that became the rallying cry for a nation in turmoil. Number 7. Joan of Kent and Edward the Black Prince. In the turbulent 14th century, long before the legendary War of the Roses ripped England apart, there was a woman whose personal choices sent shockwaves through the royal family and court. Her name was Joan, known as the Fair Maid of Kent, because of her remarkable beauty. She was a cousin of King Edward III, a powerful and influential figure in the Plantagenet dynasty. However, Joan's romantic life was anything but conventional for a noblewoman of her standing. Joan was fiercely independent and followed her heart, often to the chagrin of her royal relatives and the strict social norms of the time. Her first major scandal occurred when she secretly married Thomas Holland, a humble knight, without obtaining the necessary royal permission. At the time she was still young, perhaps as young as 12, but her decision was a bold act of defiance. This secret marriage became public only when her family tried to marry her off to William Montague, Earl of Salisbury, a much more prestigious match. Joan bravely declared she was already married to Holland. The revelation caused an uproar. For a noblewoman to marry without royal consent was a serious offense bordering on treason, as it could disrupt strategic alliances and political plans. The matter had to be brought before the Pope, Clement VI, who eventually sided with Joan and Holland, validating their secret marriage in 1349. This was a remarkable victory for Joan, showing her strong will and her determination to marry for love, or at least for her own choice, rather than pure political gain. The King Edward III was forced to accept the union, though he was undoubtedly displeased. Joan and Thomas Holland had a relatively happy marriage for over a decade, producing several children, but their time together ended with Holland's death in 1360. Now a wealthy and attractive widow with young children, Joan was once again a highly desirable match in the political marriage market. But Joan had her own ideas. Her next suitor was Edward, the Prince of Wales, often called the Black Prince, due to his fearsome armor or his dark deeds in battle. He was the eldest son and heir apparent of King Edward III, a renowned warrior and the most celebrated knight in Europe. He was also Joan's first cousin once removed and had known her since childhood. Some historical accounts suggest a long-standing affection. Perhaps even a deep love had blossomed between them many years before. Despite the social barriers, the idea of the Black Prince marrying Joan was scandalous on multiple levels. First, there was the issue of consanguinity. They were cousins, which meant they needed a papal dispensation to marry, though this was often granted for political reasons. More significantly, Joan was a widow with children, a somewhat older woman than a typical royal bride, who was usually young and unmarried, chosen for her virginity and ability to bear heirs. To marry a woman with a past, however respectable, was unusual for the heir to the throne. Furthermore, the Black Prince was expected to marry a foreign princess to secure a major political alliance for England, perhaps from France or Castile. His father, King Edward III, and the English court were undoubtedly preparing for such a grand strategic union. Yet in 1361, the Black Prince, known for his military prowess, but less for his romantic inclinations, stunned everyone by announcing his intention to marry Joan. This was not a carefully negotiated diplomatic union. It was a deeply personal decision driven by affection. The royal family, especially King Edward III and Queen Philippa, were reportedly furious and shocked. They saw it as a defiant act that jeopardized England's foreign policy and potentially undermined the prince's own prestige. The Black Prince had to actively seek papal permission for the marriage which he obtained. His sheer determination to marry Joan, despite the strong opposition from his royal parents, showed the depth of his feelings. The wedding took place quietly at Windsor Castle in October 1361. It was not the grand public spectacle usually associated with the heir to the throne. The lack of fanfare underscored the disapproval of the king and the political elite. Despite the initial disapproval, the marriage between Joan and the Black Prince proved to be a strong one. They were devoted to each other. Joan traveled with him to Aquitaine, the English territory in France, where the Black Prince governed as the king's lieutenant. She played an active role as his consort, holding court and supporting his administration. During their time in Aquitaine, they had two sons, Edward, who died young, and Richard. The birth of Richard, the future King Richard II, was crucial. He was a healthy male heir, ensuring the continuation of the Plantagenet line. The Black Prince's career was marked by incredible military victories, but also by increasing ill health. Joan nursed him devotedly through his long and debilitating illness. When he returned to England, frail and suffering, Joan continued to be his steadfast companion. She bore the brunt of his political difficulties and shared in his declining health and public frustrations. After the Black Prince's death in 1376, Joan became the guardian of their young son Richard. When Richard II became king in 1377, Joan, as the Dowager Princess of Wales and the king's mother, became an immensely influential figure. She was the most powerful woman in England and acted as a key advisor to her young son. Her presence lent legitimacy and a sense of stability to Richard's early reign, especially during the challenging Peasants' Revolt of 1381. During that uprising, Joan herself faced danger when her retinue was surrounded by rebels. She reportedly kept her composure, and her bravery, along with her sons, helped to diffuse some of the tension. Joan's life was a testament to her independent spirit. She challenged social norms, defied royal expectations, and predominantized her personal attachments, first with Thomas Holland and then with the Black Prince. While her choices caused immediate political headaches for King Edward III and the court, they ultimately led to the birth of a future king, Richard II. Her defiance of royal protocol and her personal happiness with the Black Prince did not lead to the immediate downfall of a kingdom, but it reshaped the royal family, solidified the succession, and placed a powerful, unconventional queen mother at the heart of English politics. Her story is a vivid example of how personal passions, even those defying strict political logic, could directly influence the lineage and character of future rulers, and ultimately the destiny of a nation. Number 6. King John of England and Isabella of Angoulême. The early 13th century was a fraught period for England, a kingdom grappling with the fallout of losing vast territories in France and an increasingly unpopular king. At the center of this storm was King John, a monarch whose reign would be forever marked by political failures, baronial unrest, and the dramatic events that led to the signing of the Magna Carta. His personal life, particularly his second marriage, played a surprisingly direct and explosive role in these political calamities, showing how a king's impetuous desire could spark a major international crisis. John had been married for over a decade to Isabella of Gloucester, a politically useful match, but one that remained childless. By 1200, John was eager for an heir and a more advantageous alliance. He sought an annulment from Isabella of Gloucester, which he obtained on grounds of consanguinity. They were distantly related. This move was seen by some as a cynical calculation clearing the way for a more politically beneficial union. The new bride John had in mind was Isabella of Angoulême. She was young, barely 12 years old, and renowned for her striking beauty. She was also already engaged to Hugh X of Lusignan, a powerful and influential French nobleman. The Lusignan family held significant lands in Poitou and Angoulême, territories that were crucial to England's dwindling continental empire. A marriage between Isabella and Hugh would have cemented a strong alliance between the Lusignans and the Plantagenet crown, crucial for John's hold on his remaining French possessions. Negotiations for the marriage had been ongoing for some time, and a contract was in place. Hugh X of Lusignan was already preparing for his wedding. But John, known for his impulsiveness and disregard for established norms, threw all caution to the wind. In August 1200, while traveling through Poitou, he encountered Isabella of Angoulême. Accounts suggest he was immediately captivated by her beauty. Driven by sudden desire, and perhaps a shrewd, albeit reckless, political calculation, John made a decision that shocked Europe. He abducted Isabella and married her himself almost immediately on August 24th, 1200, in Angoulême. This was an unprecedented act of royal disregard for custom and international law. To snatch a betrothed noblewoman from her fiancé was a grave insult, a deep violation of feudal custom, and a direct affront to the powerful Lusignan family. It was not just a personal slight. It was a profound political mistake that ignited a dangerous powder keg. Hugh X of Lusignan was understandably enraged. His honor was publicly disgraced, and his family's prestige was severely damaged. He immediately appealed to John's overlord in France, King Philip II, Augustus. Philip Augustus was a shrewd and ambitious monarch, constantly seeking opportunities to undermine the English Plantagenets and reclaim their vast French territories. He saw John's outrageous act as the perfect pretext. He summoned King John to appear before his court in Paris to answer for his conduct towards the Lusignan. For John, this was a difficult situation. As Duke of Normandy and Aquitaine, he was technically a vassal of the French king. However, as King of England, he considered himself sovereign and refused to attend. He dismissed the summons as an attack on his royal dignity. John's refusal to answer the charges gave Philip Augustus precisely the justification he needed for war. In 1202, the French king declared all of John's continental lands, including the Duchy of Normandy and Anjou, to be forfeit. This legal maneuver provided the basis for a full-scale invasion. Philip, with the support of the enraged Lusignans and other disaffected French nobles who saw John's actions as dishonorable. What followed was a swift and catastrophic loss for John. His barons, many of whom were already alienated by his heavy-handed rule and capricious nature, offered little resistance. They viewed John as a king who had brought dishonor upon himself and had provoked an unnecessary war through his personal recklessness. They also saw the Lusignan grievance as legitimate. Philip Augustus quickly conquered Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Touraine, effectively dismantling the continental empire that had been built by John's father, Henry II. The only significant territory remaining to England was Aquitaine. The loss of these vast and wealthy territories was a profound blow to England's power and prestige. It fundamentally altered the political map of Europe, solidifying France's position as the dominant continental power and turning England into a more island-focused kingdom. This devastating defeat, known as the Loss of Normandy, was directly triggered by John's impulsive marriage to Isabella of Angoulême. Even after these profound political consequences, John and Isabella's relationship continued, though it remained complicated. They had numerous children, including the future King Henry III, finally securing a succession. Isabella, though young when she married John, grew into a strong-willed woman. After John's death in 1216, she returned to her homeland of Angoulême and astonishingly married her former fiancé, Hugh X of Lusignan, with whom she had several more children. This second marriage to Hugh sparked further political tensions between England and France, as Isabella, now a powerful countess, actively worked to undermine English influence in Aquitaine, often encouraging her Lusignan sons to challenge her son, King Henry III. The story of King John and Isabella of Angoulême is a powerful reminder that medieval politics were deeply intertwined with personal lives. King's impulsive choice, driven by attraction, a dramatic abduction, and a broken betrothal, did not just create a personal scandal. It ripped apart the fabric of international diplomacy, sparked a war that led to the loss of an landscape of Europe. It was a love story that had devastating consequences, proving that even a king's desire could cost him a kingdom. Number 5. Marie of Burgundy and Maximilian I of Austria. The year 1477 was a terrifying moment for the Duchy of Burgundy. Its powerful and ambitious Duke, Charles the Bold, had just been killed in battle, leaving no male heir. This sudden death threw the vast and wealthy Burgundian lands stretching from the Netherlands down into France and Switzerland into utter chaos. Just 19 years old, Charles's only child, Marie, became the Duchess. She was now the richest heiress in Europe, and her hand in marriage was the ultimate prize, a strategic asset coveted by every major European power. The political fate of Burgundy and potentially much of Europe rested entirely on whom she would choose to marry. The pressure on Marie was immense. Her lands were immediately threatened by King Louis XI of France, often called the Universal Spider for his cunning and manipulative diplomacy. Louis claimed that parts of Burgundy, particularly the duchy itself, reverted to the French crown upon Charles the Bold's death. As Marie was a woman, he immediately invaded Burgundian territory, seizing key cities and fortresses. Marie found herself facing a hostile invasion, a divided and frightened court, and an urgent need for a powerful protector. Suitors swarmed. The most pressing was Louis XI's own son, the Dauphin Charles, later King Charles VIII of France. A marriage to the Dauphin would have united Burgundy directly with France, a move that Louis desperately wanted to consolidate his power and eliminate a powerful rival state on his borders. Marie was even held by her own rebellious subjects in Ghent, who favored a French marriage to secure their own privileges, and forced her to sign away some of her ducal rights. They threatened violence if she did not comply. She possessed a strong will, inherited perhaps from her formidable father. She did not want to marry the Dauphin. He was only 7 years old, meaning she would face a long regency controlled by her father-in-law, Louis XI, whom she deeply distrusted. More importantly, she disliked the idea of Burgundy being absorbed by France, losing its unique identity and independence. She understood the critical importance of her marriage choice. It was not just about her personal happiness. It was about the survival of her duchy. Her preferred choice, and the one that would have the most profound political consequences, was Maximilian of Austria, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III. Maximilian was a young man of her own age, handsome, chivalrous, and a skilled knight. He belonged to the Habsburg dynasty, a rising power in Europe whose lands included much of modern-day Austria and parts of Germany. A marriage between Marie and Maximilian would create a formidable alliance capable of resisting French aggression and potentially uniting the vast territories of Burgundy with the growing Habsburg Empire. The negotiations were fraught with danger and urgency. Marie's envoys secretly negotiated with the Habsburgs. While French forces continued to encroach on her lands, she had to navigate the treacherous political landscape of her own court, where some nobles leaned towards France and others towards Austria. Ultimately, Marie made her choice, signaling her defiance of Louis XI. She sent a ring and a portrait of herself to Maximilian, a symbolic gesture of acceptance. Maximilian, eager for such a valuable prize, quickly rode to Ghent, arriving in August 1477. Their meeting was described as a moment of genuine connection. They were married within days of his arrival. The wedding was a quiet affair, a stark contrast to the grandeur that would typically accompany such a monumental union. But its political repercussions were anything but quiet. The marriage between Marie of Burgundy and Maximilian I was an immediate declaration of war against France. Louis XI, furious that his prize had slipped through his fingers, intensified his military campaign. The Burgundian Wars raged for years, with Maximilian leading Burgundian and imperial forces against the French. These wars were brutal and costly, but Maximilian, a capable military commander, managed to defend many of Marie's territories, although he could not fully recover everything Louis had seized. The Treaty of Arras in 1482, signed after Marie's tragic death, formalized some of the territorial losses, but it largely preserved the integrity of the remaining Burgundian lands for the Habsburgs. Beyond the immediate conflict, this marriage had monumental long-term political consequences for all of Europe. It united the vast wealth and strategically important territories of Burgundy, especially the Low Countries, what is now Belgium and the Netherlands, with the expanding power of the Habsburg dynasty. This single marriage became a cornerstone of Habsburg power. The children of Marie and Maximilian, particularly their son Philip the Handsome, inherited both the Burgundian and Habsburg lands through Philip's marriage to Juana, the Mad of Castile and Aragon, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Their son, Charles V, would inherit an empire and power. Spain, its vast overseas colonies, Naples, Sicily, Auria, the Netherlands, and parts of Germany, a realm upon which the sun never set. The marriage of Marie and Maximilian was at its heart a strategic alliance. But historical accounts also suggest a deep and genuine affection grew between them. They were reportedly devoted to each other, and Maximilian was deeply grieved by Marie's death. In 1482, after a fall from her horse, she died at only 25. Her early death was a personal tragedy for Maximilian, but it did not undo the political consequences of their union. The story of Marie of Burgundy and Maximilian I is a powerful testament to how one woman's choice, made under immense duress and against powerful opposition, could fundamentally redraw the map of Europe. Her marriage, driven by a desire for independence and a personal connection, cemented the rise of the Habsburgs as a dominant force, laid the groundwork for centuries of conflict between France and the Habsburgs, and directly led to the creation of one of the largest empires in world history. It was a love story forged in crisis with consequences that reverberated across continents for generations. Number 4. Edward II of England and Piers Gaveston. The early 14th century saw a king on the English throne, whose personal preferences sparked a political crisis that ultimately led to his downfall. Edward II, who became king in 1307, was a very different man from his formidable warrior father, Edward I. While his father was known for his military conquests and stern rule, and crucially in the companionship of a very specific group of friends, among these one figure stood out above all others: Piers Gaveston. Gaveston was a Gascon knight, part of the royal household, and had been a companion of Edward since their youth. He was charming, witty, arrogant, and extremely good at riding horses and jousting. From the moment Edward became king, his favor towards Gaveston was absolute and extreme. Edward showered Gaveston with titles, wealth, and power, elevating him far beyond his social standing. Gaveston was made Earl of Cornwall, a title previously reserved for members of the royal family. He was given vast lands and riches, and became the king's chief advisor and closest confidant. This extraordinary favoritism was deeply resented by the English nobility, particularly the powerful magnates, many of whom were the king's own relatives. They saw Gaveston as an upstart, a low-born foreigner who monopolized the king's attention and controlled access to the throne. Gaveston's arrogance did not help matters. He openly mocked the leading earls, giving them insulting nicknames. For example, he called the Earl of Warwick the Black Dog of Ardern, and the Earl of Lancaster the churl. This behavior deeply offended the powerful men who believed they were entitled to advise the king and participate in governance. The nature of Edward and Gaveston's relationship has been debated by historians for centuries. Some modern historians interpret it as a romantic and sexual relationship, noting the intense emotional bond and the unprecedented levels of favor Edward bestowed upon Gaveston. Contemporary chroniclers remarked on the excessive and inordinate affection the king held for Gaveston. Regardless of its exact nature, the intensity of their bond and its exclusive nature had undeniable political consequences. Edward's obsession with Gaveston led him to neglect his royal duties, ignore the advice of his nobles, and make decisions that benefited his favorite at the expense of the kingdom. The magnates, led by figures like Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, Edward's cousin, and Aymer de Valence, Earl of Pembroke, began to organize against Gaveston. They demanded his banishment from the kingdom. Edward reluctantly and under immense pressure agreed to exile Gaveston multiple times. Each time, however, Edward found a way to bring his favorite back, demonstrating his deep emotional dependence. He even appointed Gaveston Lieutenant of Ireland at one point, which was meant to be a form of honorable exile, but Gaveston was soon recalled. The returns of Gaveston only intensified the baronial outrage. In 1311, the barons drew up the Ordinances, a series of reforms designed to limit the king's power and ensure that royal appointments and policies were made with the consent of the nobility. Crucially, the ordinances demanded Gaveston's permanent banishment and forbade the king from recalling him. Edward was forced to accept these ordinances, a huge blow to his royal authority. But Edward, true to form, could not stay away from Gaveston for long. In early 1312, Gaveston returned to England yet again. This was the final straw for the barons. They saw it as a direct defiance of their authority and a betrayal of the ordinance. The leading earls, effectively uniting in rebellion, hunted Gaveston down. He was captured in Scarborough Castle in May 1312. What happened next was a stark demonstration of the depth of baronial fury. Gaveston was taken to Warwick Castle, where the Earl of Warwick, the Black Dog, was determined to make an example of him. Despite promises of a proper trial, Gaveston was summarily executed without due process in June 1312. He was taken from Warwick Castle, carried to Blacklow Hill, and beheaded. The execution of a royal favorite, particularly one so closely tied to the king, was an unprecedented act of political violence, a clear message to Edward II that the barons would not tolerate his disregard for their power and the rule of law. Gaveston's death did not solve Edward's problems. It only intensified them. Edward was heartbroken and enraged by the murder of his beloved companion. The execution polarized the court even further, leading to a period of open hostility and near civil war between the king and his leading magnates. Although a temporary peace was eventually brokered, the trust between king and barons was shattered. Power vacuum and the continuing dysfunction at court created by Edward's inability to govern effectively and his continued preference for new favorites, like Hugh Despenser the Younger, who also aroused intense baronial hatred, eventually led to a full-blown crisis. By 1326, Edward's wife, Isabella of France, who had long suffered from her husband's neglect and favoritism, formed an alliance with Roger Mortimer, a powerful exiled baron. They invaded England, deposed Edward II, and forced him to abdicate in favor of his son, Edward III. Edward II himself was imprisoned, and almost certainly brutally murdered in Berkeley Castle in 1327. The intense, arguably romantic relationship between Edward II and Piers Gaveston was far more than a personal dalliance. It was a catalyst for unprecedented baronial opposition, a systematic attempt to curb royal power, and ultimately, a direct cause of Edward II's deposition. And tragic end. King's devotion to one man and his willingness to sacrifice political stability for that bond led to a chain of events that reshaped the power dynamics between the English monarchy and its nobility, culminating in one of the most dramatic royal downfalls in English history. It was a love story, or a story of intense favoritism that brought a king to his knees. Number 3. Isabella of France and Roger Mortimer. The early 14th century saw one of the most shocking and dramatic royal downfalls in English history, engineered by a queen who had been pushed to her absolute limit. Isabella of France, known as the She-Wolf of France, was married to Edward II of England in 1308. Their marriage was initially seen as a grand alliance between two powerful kingdoms, France and England, meant to bring peace after years of conflict. Isabella was beautiful, intelligent, and strong-willed, the daughter of the formidable King Philip IV of France, who was known as the Fair. However, the marriage quickly soured. Edward II was openly devoted to his male favorites, most notably Piers Gaveston, whose influence alienated the English nobility and caused immense frustration for Isabella. Edward neglected his queen, denied her influence, and often humiliated her publicly. When Gaveston was eventually executed by the barons, Edward simply replaced him with a new favorite, Hugh Despenser. The younger Despenser was far more insidious and greedy than Gaveston. He and his father, Hugh Despenser the Elder, quickly gained complete control over Edward II, manipulating the king for their own vast personal gain. They amassed immense wealth and power, often at the expense of other nobles, and ruthlessly pushed aside anyone who challenged them, including Isabella. The Despensers actively worked to isolate Isabella from her husband and her own children. Her dower lands were seized, her household was restricted, and she was often left without adequate funds. Accounts from the time suggest she was in desperate straits, often treated with contempt and disrespect by the dispensers who control the king's every move. By 1325, Isabella's patience had run out. Her brother, Charles IV of France, had seized Edward II's remaining French territory, Aquitaine. Edward, unwilling to leave the dispensers, sent Isabella to France to negotiate. This was her chance. She was free from the suffocating control of the dispensers and her indifferent husband. In France, she found support among her family, particularly her brother, the French king. More importantly, she met Roger Mortimer, a powerful and matic English nobleman who had been exiled by Edward II and the dispensers. Mortimer was everything Edward II was not: ambitious, decisive, and a skilled military leader. He had also suffered greatly at the hands of the dispensers, having been imprisoned and narrowly escaped execution. Their shared hatred of the dispensers and their desire for revenge quickly forged a powerful bond. What started as a political alliance soon blossomed into a passionate affair. Isabella, neglected and humiliated for years, found in Mortimer a partner who respected her intelligence and shared her grievances. Their public affair in the French court was a huge scandal. As Queen of England, Isabella was supposed to be a loyal wife, not conspiring with an exiled enemy of the crown. Her blatant defiance of her husband's authority and her open relationship with Mortimer sent shockwaves across Europe. Edward II furiously demanded her return to England. But Isabella refused, claiming she would not return until Despenser was removed from power. She famously declared that she would not return to her husband while he was in thrall to a liar and a perverse tyrant. With French support and the backing of other English exiles, Isabella and Mortimer began to plan an invasion of England. This was an incredibly audacious and dangerous plan. Queen invading her own kingdom with her lover to overthrow her husband was unprecedented. They gathered an army, secured ships, and in September 1326, Isabella, Mortimer, and a small force landed in Suffolk. The invasion was a stunning success. Edward II's regime was so unpopular, thanks to the dispensers' tyranny, that very few people rallied to his defense. The country rose up in support of Isabella and Mortimer. The dispensers, both father and son, were quickly captured. Their executions were brutal and public, a reflection of the deep hatred they had inspired. Hugh Despenser, the younger, was hanged, drawn, and quartered, his body dismembered and displayed as a warning. With Despenser gone and no support remaining, Edward II was captured and, in January 1327, was forced to abdicate his throne in favor of his young son, Edward III. This was the first time an English king had been deposed by his own queen and her lover. Isabella and Mortimer became the de facto rulers of England, governing as regents for the young King Edward III. Their rule, however, was short-lived and increasingly unpopular. Mortimer, now wielding immense power, became arrogant and greedy, mirroring some of the very behaviors that had made the dispensers so hated. He amassed titles and wealth, and Isabella, deeply in love and trusting of him, allowed him significant authority. The ultimate scandal and act of terror came in September 1327, when Edward II died in captivity at Berkeley Castle. While the official cause was not explicitly stated, it was widely believed, and indeed highly probable, that he was brutally murdered on Isabella and Mortimer's orders, likely to prevent any future attempts to restore him to the throne. The method, according to chroniclers, was a red-hot poker inserted anally, leaving no outward marks, but sending a chilling message. The murder of the former king, combined with Mortimer's growing arrogance and the heavy financial burdens placed on the kingdom, soon alienated many of their supporters. The young King Edward III, chafing under Mortimer's controls, secretly planned his own coup. In October 1330, Edward III, with the support of loyal nobles, burst into Nottingham Castle, where Isabella and Mortimer were staying. Mortimer was captured, despite Isabella's desperate pleas to her son. "Fair son, have pity on the gentle Mortimer." He was swiftly brought to trial and executed. Mortimer was hanged, drawn, and quartered, meeting a fate similar to the dispensers he had replaced. Isabella was spared, but her political power was over. She was effectively retired from public life, kept under comfortable but strict house arrest for the rest of her days. She lived for many more years, surviving her former lover, but never again wielded political authority. The story of Isabella of France and Roger Mortimer is a truly shocking one. Their forbidden love, born out of shared desperation and revenge, directly led to the deposition and probable murder of a king, a dramatic change in the English monarchy, and a period of turbulent rule. Their passion did not just inflame their own lives, it set a kingdom ablaze and forever changed the course of English history. Number 2. Heloise and Abelard. In the early 12th century, Paris was rapidly becoming a center of intellectual thought and learning. Among its most brilliant and celebrated scholars was Peter Abelard, a philosopher, theologian, and logician, whose lectures drew thousands of students from across Europe. Abelard was known for his sharp mind, his eloquent speeches, and his often controversial ideas that challenged traditional interpretations of Scripture. He was also charming, enigmatic, a man of considerable ego. Into this vibrant intellectual world came Heloise, a young woman of exceptional intelligence and beauty, living under the care of her uncle, Canon Fulbert, a powerful cleric at Notre Dame Cathedral. Heloise was renowned for her mastery of Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, a rare achievement for anyone, let alone a woman in that era. She was fiercely independent and highly curious, eager to absorb all the knowledge she could. Abelard, aware of Heloise's talents and beauty, convinced Canon Fulbert to allow him to tutor Heloise in his own house. His stated goal was to further her education, but Abelard's true intentions, as he himself later admitted in his autobiography, Historia Calamitatum, the story of my misfortunes, were far less honorable. He wrote, "I decided to unite her with myself in the bonds of love, and the opportunity for this was most favorable." It was a classic tale of student-teacher attraction, but with devastating consequences given their positions. What began as a tutoring arrangement quickly spiraled into a passionate and illicit love affair. Abelard was in his late 30s, Heloise barely 17. They were both brilliant, driven, and intensely attracted to each other. Their secret meetings, the exchanged letters, and the stolen moments consumed them. Heloise became pregnant. This was a catastrophic development for Abelard, whose career as a cleric and a scholar depended on his reputation and celibacy. For Heloise, an unmarried woman in medieval society, it meant shame and ruin. To protect his career, Abelard secretly moved Heloise away to his sister's house in Brittany, where she gave birth to a son, whom they named Astrolabe, in an attempt to salvage his reputation and somewhat legitimize the child. Abelard secretly married Heloise. Heloise initially resisted the marriage, fearing it would harm Abelard's career and prevent him from rising higher in the church. She even argued against the institution of marriage itself, suggesting it was an obstacle to true philosophy and spiritual devotion. This was a radical idea for her time and showed her independent philosophical thought. However, Abelard insisted, and they were married in secret. The secrecy, however, was short. Lived Canon Fulbert, Heloise's uncle, was furious. He felt deeply dishonored and betrayed by Abelard's actions. He believed Abelard had seduced his niece and ruined her reputation and his own by entering into a secret marriage which he saw as a deliberate deception. In an act of savage revenge, Fulbert orchestrated a brutal attack on Abelard. While Abelard was sleeping, Fulbert's servants broke into his room and castrated him. Physical act of castration was not just a horrific personal mutilation. It was a symbolic act designed to humiliate Abelard, to end his career as a clerical office, and to punish him for his illicit affair. It was a stark reminder of the extreme personal and political risks associated with forbidden love in the medieval world. The public shame and physical trauma were immense for both Abelard and Heloise. Following this traumatic event, both Abelard and Heloise sought refuge in monastic life. Abelard, deeply scarred and humiliated, entered the monastery of Saint Denis. Heloise, heartbroken but resilient, took the veil and became a nun at the convent of Art and Tree, and later became abbess of the Paraclete, a monastery founded by Abelard himself. Their love story, however, did not end there. For years after their forced separation, they exchanged a series of extraordinary letters. These letters, which have survived to this day, reveal their profound intellectual and emotional bond. They discuss theology, philosophy, their past love, their suffering, and their enduring affection for each other. Heloise's letters, in particular, stand out for their raw emotion, her powerful intellect, and her refusal to apologize for her love for Abelard. Even as she embraced her monastic vows, she writes, with an incredible depth of feeling and philosophical sophistication, the story of Heloise and Abelard had profound consequences beyond their personal tragedy. Abelard's castration and their forced separation became a sensational scandal across Europe, discussed and debated in intellectual circles. It served as a stark warning about the dangers of challenging clerical celibacy and the powerful grip of societal norms and ecclesiastical authority. The affair and its brutal fallout highlighted the intense tension between individual desire, intellectual freedom, and the rigid constraints of the medieval church and social order. Furthermore, their philosophical and theological exchanges in their letters contributed significantly to medieval thought. Heloise, in particular, through her correspondence, became a powerful and enduring voice for women's intellect and emotional depth in a world that largely denied them such agency. Their story influenced later thinkers and writers, shaping ideas about love, sacrifice, and the pursuit of knowledge. Abelard's later works, despite his personal tragedy, continued to challenge established theological doctrines, further cementing his place as a controversial but highly influential figure. Their love story, born in secret and ending in public humiliation and monastic vows, serves as a powerful example of how personal passions, when they defy the powerful institutions of the time, could have devastating political and social repercussions. It highlighted the punitive nature of medieval society towards transgression and solidified the image of the intellectual as a figure who could be both brilliant and dangerously transgressive. Heloise and Abelard's love story, though tragic, remains a timeless testament to intellectual passion, enduring love, and the unforgiving power of a society scorned. Number 1. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England. In the 12th century, few figures were as powerful, influential, and utterly captivating as Eleanor of Aquitaine. Duchess of Aquitaine, in her own right, a vast and wealthy territory in what is now southwestern France, she was one of the most eligible women in Europe. Her first marriage was to King Louis VII of France. It was a politically important union, but personally it was a disaster. Louis was pious and rather meek, while Eleanor was spirited, dynamic, and accustomed to the lively liberal culture of her Aquitanian court. After 15 years and 2 daughters, their marriage was annulled in 1152 on grounds of consanguinity, a common legal loophole for royal divorces. Within weeks of her annulment from the King of France, Eleanor made a move that sent shockwaves across Europe. She married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, who was 10 years her junior and not yet King of England. This was an astonishing and deeply provocative act. Not only was it an incredibly quick second marriage, but Henry was a vassal of the French king, and he was taking control of a vast portion of France that Louis VII had just effectively released. Louis was furious, seeing it as a blatant act of betrayal and aggression. When Henry became King of England in 1154, 2 years after their marriage, the Angevin Empire was born. This was not a traditional empire, but a collection of lands under Henry's rule: England, Normandy, Anjou, Maine, Touraine, and through Eleanor, the enormous Duchy of Aquitaine. This meant that the English king controlled more land in France than the French king himself. This setup was a constant source of tension and conflict, fueling the Anglo-French rivalry for centuries to come, laying the groundwork for the 100 Years' War. The marriage of Eleanor and Henry, initially a whirlwind romance of ambition and power, fundamentally altered the geotile map of Western Europe. Eleanor and Henry were a formidable power couple. Both were brilliant, strong-willed, and highly ambitious. They had 8 children together, 5 sons and 3 daughters, including the future kings, Richard the Lionheart and John. For the first decade of their marriage, they were a powerful, dynamic force building and consolidating their vast empire. Eleanor was not just a queen. She was a political partner, often ruling Aquitaine in her own right and acting as a regent. When Henry was away, however, their powerful personalities inevitably clashed. Henry was famously energetic, known for his relentless activity and his explosive temper. He also had a string of mistresses, most notably Rosamund Clifford, with whom he openly conducted an affair. Eleanor, a proud and independent woman, was not one to tolerate such disrespect. The cracks in their marriage began to show slowly at first, then dramatically widening. The personal grievances between Eleanor and Henry escalated into outright political rebellion. Eleanor grew increasingly frustrated with Henry's centralized rule and his attempts to curb the traditional independence of her beloved Aquitaine. She also felt sidelined by his affairs and his increasing reliance on other advisors. By the 1170s, their relationship had become toxic. In 1173, Eleanor made her most audacious move. She actively encouraged her sons, Henry the young king, Richard and Geoffrey, to rebel against their father. She herself fled to France to join the rebellion, effectively acting as a co-conspirator. Her support gave the young prince's rebellion immense legitimacy and resources, particularly from Aquitaine. It was an unprecedented act, a queen openly siding with her children against her own husband, the king, to dismantle his empire. The Great Revolt of 1173 to 1174 was a massive challenge to Henry II's authority, involving not only his sons and his wife, the King of Scotland, and many disaffected English and Norman barons. It was a major civil war that threatened to tear the Angevin Empire apart. Henry II, though a brilliant military strategist, faced an existential threat to his rule. Ultimately, Henry II managed to suppress the rebellion. He captured Eleanor while she was disguised as a man trying to escape. Her role in the rebellion was undeniable. As punishment, Henry imprisoned Eleanor for the next 15 years. For the vast majority of his remaining reign, Eleanor, the most powerful woman in Europe, was held under house arrest in various English castles. Her imprisonment was a stark demonstration of Henry's iron will and his determination to crush any challenge, even from his queen and sons. Despite her imprisonment, Eleanor remained a powerful symbol and a political pawn. Her release only came after Henry II's death in 1189. Their eldest surviving son, Richard the Lionheart, immediately freed his mother upon ascending the throne. Eleanor, now nearly 70, emerged from captivity with her intellect and political acumen undimmed. She immediately took on an active role in governing England during Richard's long absences on crusade, demonstrating her enduring political capability and influence. She was instrumental in raising Richard's ransom money when he was captured in Austria. She outlived Richard and even played a significant role in securing the succession for her youngest son John after Richard's death. The love story, or rather the power struggle and eventual bitter animosity between Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II, had monumental political consequences. It fueled the centuries-long rivalry between England and France. It created the vast Angevin Empire, which then struggled with internal divisions and rebellion. Their personal clash led to a major civil war, the imprisonment of a queen, and fundamentally shaped the relationship between the English monarchy and its vast continental possessions. Eleanor's independent spirit and Henry's autocratic rule were a recipe for both unparalleled power and devastating conflict, proving that even within a royal marriage, love, ambition, and defiance could redraw the map of an entire continent.